Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to the Eloqua user group for this month of June. I just had to think for a minute, what month was it? It's June, so welcome. Can you believe we're towards the end of the Australian financial year for those in Australia, and time is ticking by pretty quickly. So thanks again for joining us this month. This month is all about trigger-based or always-on campaigns. So it's kind of funny when we started planning out this particular topic, I was using the term trigger-based, and we had the discussion in the office around, well, always on is the same thing. And I kind of suppose it is the same thing, but it could be something different. But whatever terminology you use or you're familiar with, today is all about both of those, trigger-based or always-on campaigns. Let's have a close look at the agenda and see exactly what we're talking about today. So trigger-based campaigns, why you want to use them, and then we'll talk about how you identify the right people to get into those campaigns. And then also have a look at the campaign canvas and look at some considerations and things to think about by adding people to these trigger-based campaigns, and how quickly that process works, and do you want to have exclusions? There are a whole range of considerations to think about there. We'll also touch a little bit further on Release 22B, which was some information that we got from last month, but we'll revisit that again for you, for those who weren't with us last month. And of course, Q&A is live throughout the entire session, so please feel free to do that. So for those who join us regularly, you know that the sessions are recorded and webinar replays are available through our blog. You can visit marketingcube.com.au/blog, and you'll typically find those there within 7 days or so from the event. There's also a library of past replays that you can access there as well. I would ask you to use the Q&A function throughout the webinar. Please be aware that the Q&A is visible to all attendees as well, and you can also upvote. So if somebody asks a question that you also like to ask, well, you can upvote it using the Zoom interface. If you did want to ask us a question that's a little bit more private, please use the chat, and we're happy to address that for you as we move through the session. So my name is Derek Bell. I'm the Director of Customer Success and Marketing here at Marketing Cube, and I look forward to your participation. So let's jump in and look at the first point, which is defining these trigger-based or always-on campaigns and some examples of how you might use them. So if you do have any suggestions or ideas, please feel free to throw those into the Q&A or the chat, whichever, and they could, I'm sure, add to the discussion as we move through. So the first step is to define what we mean by trigger-based or always-on. So there are a range of definitions that could be used, and you can certainly Google and you might come up with a similar one to the one that I found. But the trigger essentially is data, and that data can be profile data, it can be digital body language, so it could be a person's inactivity or their activity in relation to email engagement potentially, but you can use a whole range of things. So it could be a certain date or time that might trigger something. If you think about a change in current events that might be happening within your database, and so whatever that change may be, perhaps that's a trigger to involve or to add somebody to a particular campaign. There might be an action on behalf of the user. The user in this case is not the Eloqua user, but the end or the person in your database, I suppose your target audience member in that case. It could also be time lapsed or time elapsed since a last interaction. So the B2C world are really good at this one. I got an email the other day from a furniture store, I've forgotten who it was, basically saying, hey, you haven't opened any of our emails in a little while. We really miss you. Yeah, I'm sure they miss me. But it prompted me because we have been looking at some things that we wanted to buy. And so it was just a reminder to go back potentially and have a look at some of those communications. So there are a whole range of reasons as to why you may want to reach out to somebody based on time elapsed. So that's a definition of what it is, but what are some scenarios that you may use to have people enter into your campaign? Now, I say here you're only limited by your imagination, and I've got 4 bullet points. We potentially could go on forever and have lots of bullet points, but some of the more common triggers that I see for clients and even ourselves here at Marketing Cube using. The first one potentially is to re-engage. So the re-engagement campaign is in reality, it can be a moment in time, but as I often say to clients, when it comes to re-engagement campaigns, all of the effort involved in building out a re-engagement campaign, surely we could potentially make that so it's an always-on campaign. And then we create some sort of a trigger that would nominate people to become a campaign member within that particular piece. Now, some considerations to think through there would be time-sensitive information. So if you're looking to do a re-engagement campaign that is a one-off campaign that you want to run next month, it may be that in your copy for your emails, etc., and any landing pages that you may have in there, you may have time-sensitive information. So as soon as we move it to becoming an always-on campaign, we probably want to think a little bit more carefully about that type of content. Now, you can use things like shared content to keep the content fresh. That would be certainly one way to do it. But typically speaking, if it's going to be an always-on campaign, you want to try and remove any time-sensitive communications or content from those particular campaigns. So the trigger could be, for instance, that they've not opened any emails within the past X number of months. Now, your filter would want to be clever enough to probably say, have they been sent X number and not opened X number? We want to make sure that's clear. You could also potentially trigger a campaign to target people based on their recent visit to specific website pages or an Eloqua landing page. So this one can be quite helpful if you think about potentially if you've got new content that's hitting the website, maybe it's a new product or a new service that's been added to the website, it could be advantageous to proactively reach out to people, that is known contacts, that you've got visiting the website and specifically visiting a page or potentially a series of pages. I've got an example here I'll show you soon around our blog and how we do that at Marketing Cube. You may want to also automatically add people into a welcome or an onboarding campaign. Now, those two terms are sometimes used interchangeably. A welcome campaign for some people is simply welcome to our business. So somebody has subscribed to something. They may not have purchased anything, but they've for some reason subscribed, or maybe they've downloaded some content from you. Again, they're not subscribing to anything specifically, or maybe they're not even a customer, as I said. But a welcome campaign could simply be welcome to our brand. Versus an onboarding campaign, an onboarding campaign would typically follow where somebody has actually purchased something from you. And so it could be about explaining that product or that service in a bit more detail. And then obviously from your point of view as a marketer, looking at cross-sell and upsell opportunities, helping make that person aware of the broader amount of content or the broader amount of services or products that you provide that might relate to the purchase that they've made. Now, routing people to the CRM as a marketing qualified lead can be another trigger-based campaign, not so much potentially one that sends comms to them, but could be something that triggers information going into the CRM platform to deliver information to the sales team or to the service team, depending on the inquiry or what it is that they've done. But certainly lead score and changes in the lead score is a great way to create a trigger-based or an always-on type of campaign. So some things to consider and hopefully help you with some how to avoid some mistakes. So at the end of the day, the quality of your data is really going to determine the success of your campaign, and that's no different to any campaign that you run. The quality of the data is key. Now, if there are gaps in the data, remember we can be pretty smart in the way that we manage that. If they're looking at things like field merges, for instance, we create defaults. If we're delivering dynamic content and somebody doesn't quite meet a specific criteria, again, you can provide a default. So if there are gaps in some of the data, you can use that default capability to present a slightly more generic message to people. That's still on topic, but a little bit more generic. But where you do have the data and the data is clear, then let's be specific. Let's be very clear about what we present to people. The other thing you want to do is think about the frequency of when people are added to these always on or trigger-based campaigns. It may be that you do it once a day. If you want to, I think you can get right down to every 15 minutes is the minimum that we can control things. You can have live feeds depending on the scenario and setup and where the data is coming from. But typically sort of a 15 or I think actually 10-minute interval can be the frequency. Typically for the always on campaigns that we run, except for the user group, most of the others are typically waiting a day. So each day we check to see, if somebody has met the specific criteria to be added to a particular campaign. So again, just that warning around time-sensitive content in these campaigns. If you're looking to create an always-on campaign, which means it's going to be running 24/7, 365 days a year, then we need to be sensitive in relation to the content that we're putting in, making sure that it's as relevant today as it will be 12 months from today when the campaign is still running. So the end date is a consideration. As you know, as Eloqua users, every campaign canvas must have a start date and also an end date. And so that end date can be whatever you need it to be. And so, for instance, with most of our always on campaigns, I think I've got most of them set to be like finish in 2030 or something, which just gives me plenty of time to make changes and evaluate, because there's nothing more frustrating than having your always on campaign finished, because as you know, you can't just simply turn it back on again. You can do a save as, but that can be a little bit problematic sometimes depending on a whole range of different variables. So usually with your always on campaign, it's just easier to set that end date as something way out into the future. Okay. Now, the other thing you need to consider is the entry point. So how do people get into your always on campaign? What is the criteria, but also which is the channel? So are they getting there because they submitted a form? Are they getting there because there are profile changes to their contact, or their engagement or participation in other campaigns? Will you move them or add them from one campaign into your always on campaign? Now, of course, you can set a whole range of different criteria to do that. That's easy enough done. But there's a whole range of ways. So we'll show you some of these here in a moment and just give you a little bit of prompt as to some ideas that you might want to think about. So if we put your trigger campaign or your always on campaign right in the middle of the screen, and what I want to do here is explore some of the different ways people can enter the campaign. So first one could be via a form submission. So you'll know when you look at the processing steps on your form that there's a processing step there called add to campaign. So that add to campaign gives you the ability to not just simply add a person to a campaign, but specifically where in the campaign do you want them to be sent to. And I've got some screenshots in here. We'll log into Eloqua here in a moment and show you some examples of that one. The other one is obviously just general email activity. So, and it could be inactivity or activity, depending on which. So someone could be hyper engaged or they could be not engaged at all. And so you can use that along with a time frame. For instance, has not opened any emails within the past 90 days, for example. It's probably, that time frame you apply is probably really going to relate more to your buying cycle, and what would be a reasonable period of time for someone to maybe not be so engaged versus them being engaged. But that's a decision you need to make that one as a team. Now, there can be changes to the Eloqua contact as well. So, for example, I put here just as an example, maybe the primary product interest is now known. And so that would probably be in concert with a few other pieces of data. For instance, that they are a prospect, they're not a customer, they are subscribed. You might want to look at other campaign participation, etc. But as soon as you know that primary product interest, then potentially it's time now to start to narrow down the type of content that you share with that particular person. Custom objects can also be a trigger. So all of this is generally, actually 1, 2, 3, those last 3 points are all triggered from a segment and using filters in a segment. So if there are custom object changes, specific information that is now known, perhaps that could be a contact or could be a trigger potentially. But it's not always, just as it's the positive that, yes, we have certain data available, it could be that some data is blank. So if the objective is to obtain pieces of information that you know are missing, the fact that that particular piece of data is missing from the contact, that could also serve as a trigger to engage with somebody to then try and get that information from them. So you've got a better idea of who they are and what they're looking for. So lead score changes. There's 2 ways to do this. The program Canvas has a function where it listens for changes in a lead score. The ability to listen for a change in the lead score is a little bit different to the way we do it in segments. In segments, we're looking for a specific lead score of A1, A2, B1, B2, for example, and you can select a range. So when the person makes that change, or the contact is updated to reflect that particular change, they could come in through a segment. Some of the benefit of using the lead or the program canvas to do the listening, though, is we can be very clear about, did the lead score increase or did it decrease? That can often be a question that you're trying to look for. And that can be used to then include or exclude somebody from a particular campaign. CRM changes. So typically, if there's a CRM change, there can be a few things that happen here. Now, each CRM is a little bit different. For those in the line, for instance, using a Salesforce CRM, where you've got a campaign object that links into Eloqua, you could, for instance, create the campaign within the CRM, take that ID, associate that to the segment within Eloqua, and then as your CRM users are adding people to that particular campaign, Eloqua is constantly listening for anybody being dropped into that particular campaign, and will bring them through into the segment and then drop them onto the canvas that you've got running where it's associated. So that's one way to do it. Typically, other CRM changes are reflected onto the Eloqua contact anyway, and so that would be covered under the changes to Eloqua contact data. And of course, website activity. This is one of the more exciting and more interesting things that you can use Eloqua for, is website activity. So not just your CMS, but obviously also Eloqua landing pages. And so any website that you own, that you have the Eloqua tracking code on, where Eloqua has visibility of your known contacts and what they're actually doing on those respective web pages, can serve as a trigger. Now, you can either break it down to a single URL, so a person has visited this particular page, or potentially you could look at a series of pages, and that's where your page tagging can be quite helpful. So page tagging enables you to group a whole series of URLs together under a single topic. So across your website, you might have information about the business, you might have information about your products, information about your services, and then under products, you might have 5 or 10 or potentially hundreds of unique products. And so where you've got groupings, you can take those as subsets of products, for instance. So if anybody's looked at any of the 5 or 6 pages on your website that relate to product A, then let's get those people automatically flowing into a particular campaign as well. So the same thing can apply with website activity from a recency point of view. So again, we can look at, did they do it in the last 7 days, the last 90 days, whatever it might be. If it's a trigger-based campaign, you probably want to look at quite recent engagement. So it could be within the last 24 hours, it could be within the last few days, maybe the last week, for example. Probably not much point in doing 90 days, for example. Okay, so that could be just a little bit too far away for people to remember, oh yes, 3 months ago I looked at this. That may not be the best outcome. Okay, so adding the right people to your trigger-based campaigns. So this is the fun part, and it's not just about the inclusions, it's probably also about the exclusions. So if we look at it from a step-by-step point of view, we want to determine your multi-step campaign canvas entry trigger. So that's the first thing. We need to work out how they're actually going to get into this trigger-based campaign. Is it from a segment? Is it a program canvas or a form that's potentially delivering this person? And think through the CX, think through the experience of, well, okay, the person qualifies for this always on campaign because they, let's use one example, they've downloaded a specific white paper, for example. So it's 9 o'clock in the morning, they've downloaded a specific white paper, and within 15 minutes or so, or 10 or 15 minutes, that information will flow through within Eloqua, and your always on campaign will be able to pick that up and know that that's happened. So is it appropriate that they get dropped into your campaign and shot out an email sort of within half an hour or an hour of that particular process, it may well be appropriate in your world, and that's completely okay. But just be aware that these things will happen exactly as you kind of tell them to happen. And so if you feel it's better to maybe wait a day, maybe it's wait 24 hours, etc., things like that, then we can use wait steps to control that. And there are a range of ways that you can do that. So think through that CX, put yourself in the shoes of the person you're targeting and think through exactly what that experience is going to be like. Of course, it's important to always think about the overall campaign objective. What is the overall objective that we're trying to achieve here? Why are we creating these always-on campaigns? And why are we trying to throw people into these particular campaigns? So think through that objective, think through carefully, and then also look at how you're going to measure the success. Of course, you've got a whole range of insight campaign reports that you can extract at any particular point. That's easy enough, but try and think that through before the campaign goes live, so you can make sure you've got everything lined up and you can report on the pieces or the aspects of your campaign that are in fact important to you as an organization. Okay, exclusions are as important as inclusions. So when you create a segment, if a segment is the entry point, the segment it can contain, well, actually, I've got one here to show you, which I'll show you here shortly, but the exclusions are just as important because you still want to get good campaign results. You want to make sure the campaign reporting is clear in relation to people you can actually talk to. So let's not include hard bounces. Let's not include people who have unsubscribed. Let's not include people who are inactive. For example, you may have account types. You may not want to talk to competitors, or you may not want to talk to customers specifically. That this is all about prospective customers, so leads, for example. So think through the exclusions just as you would the inclusions in that process. On the campaign canvas, there are a few ways that you can continue the interrogation of these people as they enter the campaign. So the shared filter is probably one of the most flexible ones, because the shared filter enables you to take the filtering that you're doing on the segment when you drop them into your always-on campaign. The shared filter then enables you to continue to qualify. So if your always-on campaign contains 5 or 6 different emails, and you have some really clear objectives as to the type of information you're trying to gather about these people, then we can make sure that we check each point before the next email is sent. We can use the shared filter to check a whole range of different things. And if in fact we now have the information that we need, there's probably no point in continuing the person through the campaign. So we can exclude them, which can be helpful. Okay, we don't need to send people millions of emails. We just need to send them enough in the hope that we can obtain the information that we need, but also deliver some value along the way as well. A very soft indicator could be, are they visiting the website? So based on the information you're sending them, if the objective is to drive people to the website, are they in fact doing that? And so visited website, remember, visited website is very generic. It's not about any particular page. It's just about the website. So have they visited your website at all? Yes or no? You can then start to drill in a little bit more detail, both on the contact and also on the custom objects, by looking at very specific fields. So the shared filter enables you to do a whole range of multiple things combined all together. However, when you look at the compare contact fields or compare custom object fields, we're now looking very specifically at individual fields within those 2 pieces of data. A shared list member is a really good one, and we'll talk a little bit more about that one as we progress through. Submitted form. So remember, submitted form relates to campaign members specifically. So have campaign members in this campaign submitted that particular form? And so again, if that's the objective of the campaign, to get people to fill in a form, and if you think about it, maybe it's a re-engagement campaign, for example, and your objective is to drive people to the preference center to have them update their information and update their preferences. If they've done that, well, we don't need to send them more emails to drive them to do the same thing, because they've in fact just done it. So let's take advantage of the automation and then exclude the person from, or remove the person from the campaign at that particular point. All right, let's jump in and have a look at some different entry points and just some examples. So, for instance, what we're using here at Marketing Cube. Okay, so what have I got here? Let's start with blog visitors. So I was playing around with this one with different filters and times. And so essentially what I've done here, you'll see there's a bunch of exclusions here. So anyone that's inactive, anyone that's unsubscribed, any hard bounces, particular contact types that we may not want to reach out to for whatever reason. So they're all the exclusions. And then here I've got my variables. And so you'll notice that we've got visited website. Now I just want to do something here to show you how page tagging can be helpful. I'm just going to delete the page tag there for a moment. And click on save. Just watch this number up here. So 10, okay, it's a considerable drop in numbers. So what that's telling us is that over the last 90 days, we've had 10 people visit the blog homepage at least once. Now, of course, depending on how people reach the website, it's clear from this number and the one you saw a moment ago that the actual blog homepage is not the primary point of entry. A lot of people will come to our blog because they're Googling. They're either Googling something or maybe they're looking on other areas of our website. And then from our website, we have links to different blog articles that kind of relate to the different pages that they're looking at. So the way to make that a bit smarter is to use page tags. So visited page tags. And here what you'll see is a list. So what we've done is we have, in fact, I've got two, and I can't remember why I've got two, but I'll have to figure that out. So what I've done is I've set up blog posts, and you'll see there's another one here called Marketing Cube Blog, same thing. So I'm just going to add both of them for the purposes of this exercise. But what that is essentially is page tagging is another part of Eloqua where you add a whole range of URLs under a single topic. And so these become really helpful, especially for these types of exercises, because the other scenario is what I would need to do is then come in here to these are the list of every single page that we have and add every single blog post, which is obviously extremely cumbersome and not an ideal way of doing things. So the reason for using page tags is that structure is also intelligent enough to add anything beyond the URL. So obviously with a blog, you're adding content on a regular basis. And so what that enables us to do is every time a new blog is added, it's automatically picked up and included within this page tag. So I'm going to say at least once. And let's say within the last, I know I said don't do 90 days, but just for the purposes of the exercise. And I want to change that to or, not and. So those two variables, let's click on save. One piece of advice I'd give you whenever you're building out segments like this is to always go through a process. Every time you add a new filter, click on save so you can see the number that appears. By looking at the number as you go through the process, you can then look at each filter criteria and see the impact that each filter criteria is in fact having. Okay, so I've just got a question here from James. Morning, James. Hi, Derek. For page tagging to fire for a customer event, e.g. customer viewed a page, is there any additional code snippets required on the website for the applicable page? So James, the answer is no. Because Eloqua is already looking at your website and has visibility of the website, each time using cookies and all those sorts of fun things, each time an individual visits your website, those page URLs are in fact added to their profile. That happens pretty quickly, like usually within minutes. So then that information will flow through. So just as I've said here, there is no extra coding. It's just simply the standard Eloqua tracking code that you've got on the website today. So that hopefully answers your question. So now I've got 75 people. And of course, the other thing you probably want to start to do is then maybe start to play with the timeframes. So just go through again. And I find typically when I'm looking at a trigger-based campaign, this is where I start because I'm trying to nominate and figure out what's the size of the audience that I've got for this trigger-based campaign. So if I'm spending the time to invest and to build out a particular campaign, I want to make sure there's an audience there of a decent size that's obviously going to hopefully find value from what it is we're doing. So that's as simple as it is in relation to looking at any sort of page that you might have. If you're not familiar with page tags, please reach out. We can help you with that. You will find some information in the Help Center, but page tags are an incredibly helpful tool. They're often used in concert with lead scoring. So usually when we talk lead scoring with customers, page tagging plays a big role in that process. But going through that process, the page tags you create have great flexibility across so many different parts of Eloqua, not just in lead scoring, as you can see here. All right, let's have a look at another one. So another entry point for your trigger-based campaign could be a form processing step. So this is actually the user group form that you submitted to join us today. And in the processing step, now this is not an always on campaign, but it's the functionality that I just wanted to show you here. There's, from your list of processing steps, you can see here, add to campaign. You've got a few others too, by the way, so add to program and etc. But our focus is on add to campaign. So this particular instance, what it's doing, it's taking everybody that registers for the user group, and depending on whether or not you select the Australian user group, i.e. today, or the US user group, which services the Americas, or EMEA, which just FYI is at 11 p.m. tomorrow night. So feel free to log in if you feel so inclined. But what we do then is we determine, using the add to campaign step, not just the campaign that we're going to add them to, but where on the campaign canvas we're going to add them. And so you can see here, this is the Australian reminder and the conditions we have placed on that. So if the person has selected the Australian webinar, then I click on, I look for my campaign, here it is. And there's the AU Zoom. So you'll see here it says from a form. So it's the June Eloqua user group form. The person's coming in and is being dropped right here into the Zoom step. So that's how Zoom then goes off and registers that particular individual and brings that information back for us. If it's the US user group, same sort of logic, but this time a different place on the campaign. This is a program. So I'm jumping around here. This is a program. So this particular program, this is a new one, and we need to flesh this out in a bit more detail. But what we're trying to do here, and what we've achieved, but we now need to add more people to it. This is a program. So this is a program canvas, not the campaign canvas. So the program canvas is listening, and you'll see the little headphones there. So what it's listening for is registered people for the monthly user group webinar. So it's listening for anyone that submits a whole range, and eventually those total sources will number in the 50 or 60 or 70 or so. It'll just keep growing. And what I'm trying to do is get those people into our user group onboarding campaign. So that is for new Eloqua users. And we have some variables that determine whether or not how we know they're new. You'll notice the wait step here. So the wait step is just to slow things down a little bit, because we don't want to bombard people necessarily with information, so to speak. Are they already in the onboarding campaign? So you remember I talked about using shared lists to help sometimes, and shared lists can be really helpful. So on the actual campaign, so this is it right here. This is the onboarding campaign that people are being added to. So you've got here from program. So that's the program that we're just looking at, and that's the entry point. And so what we're doing here is we're adding people to a shared list, which essentially tells me they're campaign members. Now, there are other ways to do this, by the way. This is not the only way, but this is just the way I prefer to do it. And then at the very end of this campaign, they actually move on to another canvas. But once they move on to part B, once they finish that, I then remove them from that particular shared list. So the benefit is, when I go back to my program, that this shared list is anybody who is currently in that particular campaign. And so if they're not in the campaign, then I'm going to add them to the campaign. Now, Eloqua will never send the same email to the same person twice. So somebody should fall through this process again, which is highly unlikely with a whole range of variables that are in play. Even if Eloqua does add them back to that campaign, remember, Eloqua will never send the same email to the same person twice. Then they'll eventually just drop out of that particular campaign, because the retention policy, which means they can't stay there forever, and they'll just exit the campaign at some point. So that's another way you can use a program to have people enter into your canvas. So we've looked at programs. We've looked at from a form. So this is the add to campaign element. And then, of course, the actual segment itself, using a segment as your entry point as well. We looked at this one here. So again, keep in mind, it's not just blog visitors. Obviously, it can be any URL that you've got can help drive people through for those particular things. Within a page tag, each customer has viewed 6 pages, which have page tag X. Okay. It's probably worthwhile taking a step back here just for a minute in relation to page tagging, James. So the term page tagging is something that Eloqua has used for a very long time. And I want to say they've used that term probably longer than Google has been around in relation to tagging of pages with certain script. That's not what this is. Okay, so it's not that the page on your website has a particular tag. That's not what this is. This is just you telling Eloqua a list of URLs. Okay, so, and if anybody hits either all or some of those particular pages, that will then qualify them to go in a yes or no direction. If you wanted to be very specific around 6 pages, then what you would probably do is create a page tag that had just 6 URLs. Now, if you want it to be and, not or, so the variable would be different, I would probably use a shared filter to do that, because a shared filter gives you more control over the specifics of they've done this and this and this and this, versus when you put a group of page tags in, or URLs that make up a page tag, it's the fact that they've touched any of those. So they may have done one, but not the other 5. So if you specifically want them to only progress through a campaign because they looked at 6 very specific URLs, I would probably use a shared filter to do that. Okay, and on that point, if you do need a hand with any of these sorts of things, please feel free to contact us. You can grab your smartphone there and scan that QR code, and we'd be happy to talk with you a little more detail on any of those points that we've talked about. I imagine probably what you want to do is go away and have a little think and sort of interrogate your data in a little bit more detail, work out where those busy pages are. That's often a really good criteria, actually. Looking at your Google Analytics information along with your Eloqua Insight information, and looking at those high traffic pages that potentially are the pages that convert. You know, are there forms on those pages, and has that form been abandoned, for example? Maybe that's a trigger that you could go back and engage with a known contact based on those different variables. Okay, so multi-step campaign canvas considerations. When is automatic too much? Okay, so being stalked is typically not the feeling you're aiming for, okay? We've all had that experience where we talk about something at home and Siri or someone's listening in the background, and then all of a sudden there's an advertisement appearing on your mobile phone. I'm still not clear whether or not that's real or if it's imaginary. But however, it does leave people feel like they're being stalked digitally a little bit. So that's not the objective we're looking for. But there are a range of ways that you can manage your triggers and your always on campaign. And we've looked at some of those right now, or just here a moment ago. I talked about the shared list and how the shared list can be a really helpful way for you to manage where people are and which campaigns they're in. So those shared lists, for instance, like the one I just shared with you, how when people come into and join the user group, we then drop them into an onboarding campaign, sort of welcoming them to the user group and explaining how it works, what we do, all that kind of fun stuff. From time to time, we will use that as an exclusion on other campaigns. So if somebody's currently going through that particular campaign, we don't want to bombard them necessarily with other information at the same time. So that can be a really helpful way to just sort of slow down a little bit if you feel you need to slow down, or not to overwhelm people considerably. We have some clients who, well, a client that comes to mind, multinational, serving just about every continent on the planet. And so the onboarding process for them is kind of critical to welcoming people to the organization, helping them understand services that they deliver, so on and so forth, and using some of that information or those campaign members to exclude them from other things can be quite appropriate. Let's introduce them, let's get them focused, let's determine what the measurements are for success in that particular campaign. Then when that's finished, then let's move through and figure out what the next part of that journey should be. So the wait steps are a really great way to slow things down on the canvas. And yeah, and you can remove people as easily as you can add them, would be my last point. So let's have a look here at an example. Look at a campaign canvas and how you might do that. So this is the part A onboarding for new Eloqua users and how they come in to the particular campaign. And you notice it's slightly different. Over here on the left-hand side, these are coming from, so this is an invitation coming from our CRM. So what a CRM user is able to do is nominate an individual and add them to a campaign within the CRM. So that's how they come through from there, which is a form. The website, on our website, there's what we call the generic Eloqua user group registration form. So people may come in through that one. And then the program that I mentioned as we showed you before. So they all come through here. First thing I do is add them to the shared list. We also apply a join date to their, which sends them off to a program. And so that will happen sort of simultaneously in the background. Then a few other bits and pieces, and then we try and identify at this point, are they a customer or a prospect? And then they'll head off in slightly different directions. But essentially what this first communication is a welcome and confirmation. So they've submitted the form, and this is really just a confirmation to them that we've received that information. Thank you so much. We're thrilled to have you with us, and make sure you keep an eye out for upcoming invitations to the user group. But you'll notice over here, this one. So this one is looking at new user group members from various campaigns. So our construct is, the way we look at it is, somebody accesses a replay to the user group. The language there from an opt-in point of view indicates that they're subscribing to the user group. So keeping in mind that they've just accessed a replay. So they've gone along, they filled in a form. As a result of filling in that form, they've arrived at the replay page, plus we've sent them an email confirming that and giving them a link to go back anytime they want. So they've just had an interaction with us. I don't necessarily want to bombard them sort of an hour later with, hey, welcome to the user group sort of thing. That's okay. They're having a great moment. I'll let them have their great moment. But so that's why we put here, we just wait 24 hours. We just wait 24 hours. And then here it's a general confirmation. So this one can cite specifically, we hope you enjoyed the replay that you accessed yesterday. Here's what you can expect as a member of the user group, so on and so forth. And then again, we route them off in slightly different directions, depending on whether or not they're a customer of Marketing Cube or if they're not a customer of Marketing Cube. And so here we're using the move to campaign steps to have them flow into the next part of the exercise. So part B. So part B is a more traditional campaign, and you'll see here again where they're coming from in various directions, flowing through. Again, are they customers, etc. And essentially what we're doing here, the information is people who are not customers of Marketing Cube flow down the left-hand side, and people who are customers of Marketing Cube flow down the right-hand side. Now, you'll notice that it's highly likely within this particular process that an individual may begin the process as not being a customer, but before that campaign finishes, they may well become a customer. And so we're constantly evaluating before we send each email down the left-hand side to prospects. We're constantly asking the question, are they still a prospect, etc. And if not, then we shoot them over this side where the language changes ever so slightly in relation to how we talk to them about the user group and the services we provide and so on and so forth. So it becomes a very tailored experience as people move through that particular process. Yeah, so just to give you an idea, people, what Angeline's presented here is, for instance, your website/US, website/Denmark, I assume that is, website/UK, for example, all being home pages. So very typical of a global brand, that you'll have homepage URLs which relate directly to the different geographies and so on and so forth. I would imagine, yes, you would, Angeline, is the question, because it is URL specific. And so you do need the full URL, which you've pasted here. So https:// blah, 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 as you move through the process. So yeah, you would need to think about this from a geographical point of view. Probably would be a good way to do it. But happy to take that offline and sort of think that through a little bit more detail. Probably need to have more of a indication of your data so we can better answer that question. But my gut feel is yes, you'd probably want to end up with a US set of page tags versus a Danish set of page tags or a UK set of page tags as you go through the process, which probably makes the most sense, right? You're welcome. You're welcome. Okay, so let's quickly have a look at release 22B. So if you were with us last month, we would have covered a few of these points, but for those who weren't with us, just a couple of things for you to be aware of. Following release 22A, the ability to track auto opens became something that, well, not track, that's not the right word, but to look at the impact of the Apple auto opens on your campaigns is available through Insight. And now you can also look at auto clicks as well. So the auto click concept is often triggered by different security software depending on who you're talking to. So if you're emailing a lot of businesses or higher education people or government entities, for instance, they may have security software in play that does a little bit of auto clicking. And so there is a way that Oracle is able to determine that that's an auto click, and will exclude that from the general clicking and opening type of filters that you might ask. So if you're on the campaign canvas or if you're in a segment filter and you're asking the question, did they click or did they open? You can rest assured that you're only going to get back people who did actually open or did actually click. The autos are being excluded from that, which is good news. Okay, so we only really want to engage with people based on their behavior, not on some bot that has done the behavior on their behalf. So just a critical thing to understand in relation to the auto click is it's only being captured after the 22B update, which occurred in May. So as of May, everybody on this call will be on release 22B. And so that process has begun. So again, it's something that you're able to track in Insight. If you're not sure on how to do that, please reach out and we can help you understand that in a bit more detail. The Oracle CX apps, for those who are using extensively, most clients we find do certainly use a range of different apps, and you may have noticed previously with different updates, the apps update usually occurs on a slightly different schedule. The nice thing is the monthly maintenance on those now doesn't require any platform downtime. So if it ever caused an issue for you, it's an issue that has just simply gone away, which is kind of nice. So good thing to be aware of. Sales tools. So for those of you that are using Engage, what you're able to do here is to limit the number of sales emails that a rep can send to the same contact over a period of time. Now, there is a current ability, to not confuse this functionality, there is an ability you have at the moment to cap the number of people in a group that a salesperson can email. So for instance, an individual salesperson can produce their Engage email, but they can't send it to any more than 30 unique contacts at any one time. That's existing functionality. You can do that today. What this is doing is putting a cap on the number of emails that an Engage user can send to a single person or contact within a particular period of time. Okay, so slightly different view of that. The automated certificate management, so this relates only at this stage to pod 6 and 7. So for many of our Australian clients and New Zealand clients, your instances of Eloqua are sitting on pod 7, which is the Australian-based server of Oracle Eloqua. Pod 6, I'm not clear on where pod 6 sits, but I believe it's in North America. And we also have some Australian clients who are on pod 6 as well. What this is, and it's something that you need to opt into. If you're interested, you can obviously reach out to Marketing Cube. We can help facilitate that process for you. But it's looking at the automatic renewal of any certificates prior to their expiry. So for anyone that's had any grief around SSL certificates expiring, and then the nice thing is Eloqua does send you an email, which is great, but it goes to pretty much every administrator in the team. And so there's a lot of finger pointing usually about, well, you got the email, well, so did you, and you, well, who did it, yeah, well, and then IT are sort of left in the dark because no one passed it on. So to alleviate those concerns and to the grief that can come along with that around pages not being visible and all sorts of terrible things, then the nice part is the automatic renewal process, which Eloqua will manage for you at no charge, which is kind of nice. That's not a service fee on top of anything. They're just looking to manage that automatically for you. So if you're on pod 6 and 7 and that feature sounds like a great idea, and I can't see why it wouldn't be a great idea, then please reach out to Marketing Cube. We can help facilitate that connection for you and get you onto the right people at Oracle. And on any of those sorts of important updates, the next edition of the important update email goes out this week, which is in relation to 22B and goes into a little bit more detail on some of those particular points. If you're not already subscribed, please feel free to scan that QR code right now, and that will take you to a registration page where you can log in. Not log in, but you can fill in the form and subscribe to important updates. And that's a bit of an not an always on, because it goes for typically 3 months, but that campaign runs typically for 2.5 months, actually, about 2.5 months. And every day it just simply checks to see if there are any new subscribers, i.e. you filling in that form right now. And then within 24 hours, you'll be sent the most recent edition of the important update, which is usually four to 6 emails a year. So we certainly won't be stalking you or spamming you on that one, but hopefully it adds some value. Just gives you a little bit more information about some of these new features that are coming across your desk as you log into Eloqua each month. So next month, we're going to continue the conversation. This month, we focused quite a bit on sort of the mechanics of getting you from, building out your segment and how you might do that and playing with shared filters, etc. Next month, we're going to try and look at some really specific examples of campaigns and dive into those in a little bit more detail for you. And what I'm going to do is actually reach out to some of you. So virtue of the fact that you attended today, I hope you don't mind, but I'm going to reach out to you and see if there's any examples that you've got that you might like to share. We don't have to share your brand. That's fine. We don't have to do that. But perhaps look at any sort of always on campaign. So maybe it's a nurturing campaign. Maybe it's a re-engagement campaign that you've got running. There can be a whole swag of different campaigns. So I'm literally just going to randomly select 3 or 4 people, reach out to you. So please keep an eye out for an email from Derek, and it'd be great to get you involved. If you'd like to speak and share some information, you're totally welcome to do that as well. I'm sure other campaign members, well, you are campaign members, but other user group members would love to hear some tangible examples of what people have been doing. So we'll see you online Tuesday, the 12th of July at 11 a.m. for Sydney and AsiaPac, and then at 9 a.m. New York time, Eastern Daylight Time for the Americas and EMEA. You'll get an email, of course, following this, and you'll have links there where you can register for July. But thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate you making some time. If there are any questions, I'm more than happy to stay here on the line. Thank you, Alana and Angeline. Thanks, everybody, and have a wonderful day. We'll see you next month.